Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our Festival of Light discussion, which I'm finding extremely interesting. I hope you're enjoying it. Let's go, starting with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Inspire us that we may understand the divine purpose behind the Festival of Light, that whether listening to it or presiding or simply hearing the words in any context, we'll be drawn back into the level of inspiration from which it was given to you. Help us to see how this beautiful ritual can deepen our devotion and strengthen our commitment to God alone. Om, peace. Amen. So we are now, and I judge this from the point where we say, "O Lord, with all my heart I choose thy love." And now we're talking about the infinite Christ consciousness, the only begotten, has come down anew to earth for the salvation of mankind. And that's what Swami does a lot in this ritual is he alternates between some impersonal universal statement and then something deeply personal, so that we're not always on a level that is outside of our own experience, nor are we only just thinking subjectively about what this means to me. We're always threading this pathway between the universal principle and the personal application of it. And this is exactly true in these two paragraphs. The infinite Christ consciousness, the only begotten, has come down anew to earth for the salvation of mankind. This is a statement of the essence of Sanatana Dharma, as I was talking about it yesterday. But now where we are is we say, when we need you, Lord, our beloved, you descend. So all of a sudden, it's not about this abstraction, it's when we need you. So we also have said earlier, a prayer of love went up from earth and you responded. Because when we need you, Lord, our beloved, you descend. Now, yesterday I was talking a lot about the process of self-realization by which a jiva becomes an avatar, and then out of compassion, that jiva, instead of just enjoying an infinity of perfect bliss, feels the call of aspiring love and chooses to take incarnation again. These are matters about which I personally have no knowledge. So I've heard Master speak, I've heard Master's words, and I've heard Swami speak on this. I know I had this conversation with Swamiji once. It started out, as conversations with him often did, it started out somewhat casual and then it became quite serious. I was lamenting about the conditions of early Dwapara Yuga, which is where we live now. A few days ago I was talking about the armed conflict that Russia has instigated against Ukraine and the terrible jeopardy that we all feel because of that. So, but these are the conditions of Dwapara Yuga. The war exists all the way through, not only Dwapara Yuga, but the higher age that comes after it. So mankind learns very slowly. Or to put it differently, and this is also very important, this is only planet Earth, what goes on planet Earth. And planets are at different stages of moral and spiritual development depending where they are on the Yuga cycle. Swamiji asked Master once, once we start incarnating on Earth, do we always come back to Earth? And Master said, oh no. He said, there are countless planets to choose from, which was just like, my goodness. Which the corollary to that was when he was asked if there was other intelligent life in the universe, Master just said, of course. There are countless planets, and some of them are more advanced and some of them are darker than this one. And when we're in the astral world, we have the whole material plane to choose from, so we can go in wherever we choose. And whatever is right for us spiritually. It's not what we want. It's what our soul, what the jiva wants on its journey to God realization. So not ever having felt very in tune with the spiritual and moral development of this planet, or the lack thereof, I commented to Swamiji that the next time that you incarnate, because it's self-evident from looking at my life that my destiny is very closely tied to Swami's, and Swami's destiny is tied to Master. I said, sir, the next time you incarnate, which meant the next time I have to come also, or one of the next times, to be more fair about it, I said, maybe we can wait for a higher age. And Swami's first response was, and it was actually funny because we were eating lunch, and without even finishing the bite of the sandwich he had in his mouth, he mumbled through it, I never intend to come back. He said it just forcefully, I never intend to come back. And since Master had promised him final moksha, final complete liberation in this lifetime, returning would be a choice for him. He was a Jivan Mukta, I believe, in this lifetime and was just finishing karma, not generating any new karma, was already in that state of freedom. But in any case, that's my perception of Swami. That was his comment. Then he went on to say, he said, even at the highest age, even in Satya Yuga, it's still the material plane, he said. It's not spiritual freedom. He said, but in Satya Yuga, in the highest Yuga, he said, people like us are in charge, which I've just always found that very charming. People like us are in charge, meaning you don't have crazy egoic madmen making war on each other, because why would we do that? It's literally suicidal, which is what Master and what Jesus and Babaji called it, suicidal wars. So that was his comment then, and it was 20 years before he died, maybe even 25 years before he died. I'm trying to think of the circumstances. It was quite much earlier. Much soon after, and certainly in the last decade of his life, I had a conversation with him. This would have been probably around the year 2000. And he was living in Italy and he'd been writing, and he'd exhausted himself, I think, finishing conversations with Master. And I was talking to him on the phone and he was telling me that the evening before, he'd had his heart had become so weak. He said that he felt he could have just slipped away. It just would have been so easy just to stop breathing and leave his body. And I said to him, even though, sir, it won't be any fun to be on this planet after you're gone, you've done enough work for multiple lifetimes now, and it would be pure selfishness on our part to try to hold you when you're ready to go, whenever you're ready to go. And then somehow in that conversation we talked about his disinclination, his vairagya, which is, vairagya is another wonderful Sanskrit word which means disinclination for the things of the world. You don't hate them, you're not sickened by them, but you have a strong disinclination for them. I mean, you don't bother to dislike them in a stronger sense, because then you just build up likes and dislikes again. But this is what this world is like, and you develop vairagya. I have a disinclination for the things of this world. And somehow in that context, Swami said that he had a complete disinclination for this world. The only thing that mattered to him was our well-being. And And then he said that he, for our sakes, he would come again. And I said, well, sir, that's the only reason you came this time, isn't it? And he sort of ruefully said, well, yes, there is that, which is sort of the backhanded way he would sometimes affirm his state of spiritual freedom. And then, speaking again of vairagya, he said, but I know myself, he said, and I know that concern for all of you will bring me back again, for which, of course, I express great gratitude. By the end of his life, just to finish this cycle, Swamiji felt that even his disinclination for this world, which was his willingness, you might even say his eagerness to leave his body, he said was a revolt against God's will. And he just felt that it was not his place to say whether or not he should live or die. That if he'd surrendered his life as a disciple to Master, it had to be a complete surrender. 2009, which is when he created the Nayaswami order, his health was exceedingly poor. I'm not going to tell the whole story because I've told it in many other places, but in the course of 5 minutes, Swami, who for many weeks, several weeks, had just been so weak, and as his nurse Miriam said, he could have left his body could have stopped working for any number of reasons, is how she put it. But instead, he was lying on his couch. It was just the two of us in his house in Sisi on that day, and I helped him up from a nap. I had to button his shirt. He was so weak he couldn't button his own shirt. I took him to the living room and he stretched out on his back on the couch. And I went into the bedroom to make the bed and do a few other things. And when I came out, he was lying so still, I thought he might have died. But actually what happened during that time was he didn't ever explain it in great detail, but he had some kind of a vision, some kind of a superconscious experience where either Master or Divine Mother came to him. And basically, he said, whether I live or die, it's entirely in your hands. In other words, he was keeping his promise that even the disinclination of this world that caused him to be eager to leave his body was not a spiritually appropriate attitude. These things get very, very subtle. We think this disinclination is a spiritual attitude, but if we are dictating to God what our fate should be, then there is something that has to be balanced. And later Swamiji said, he simply put it to Divine Mother, leave me or take me, it's up to you. And when he sat up from that experience, he was healed of these weeks of illness that it was just all gone. And he started talking about founding the Nayaswami order. And he actually said, this is what Satan was trying to stop by taking me out of my body. And he got up and he started writing a book. An hour earlier I had to button his shirt, and all of a sudden he's sitting at the computer writing this book, A New Renunciate Order for a New Age. His life was very peculiar. So, going back here, peculiar in the sense of singular. Not peculiar from a divine perspective, but unique. So, coming back to the festival, when we need you, Lord, our beloved, you descend. Which, that line alone, think of the promise of that these great masters will come again and again in human form for the salvation of mankind. And as I was saying yesterday, the salvation of mankind is individual. Mankind as a whole does not evolve, even though we talk about it as if mankind does. The planet goes into a higher vibration because of the yugas, because of moving toward the grand center of the galaxy. So the planet, the civilization on the planet becomes more elevated. And in the highest age, people like us, which is to say, people who understand the divine nature of life. And so the civilization reflects high consciousness. But you don't evolve merely by clinging to planet Earth and waiting for it to evolve. If planet Earth becomes too refined for you, you incarnate in a planet that's more on your level. And if planet Earth becomes too gross, then there's no spiritual reason to be here. Now, bear in mind, Jesus was born at nearly the lowest point of civilization on this planet. Being crucified on a public road, which is what happened to Jesus, was a common experience. It wasn't special for Jesus. There were two common thieves who were crucified with him. This is just the way things were done. I mean, we advanced to the point where we executed people in private, and now we're advancing to the point where execution is becoming extremely unpopular. But it's still a very mixed bag of a planet. But when we need you, Lord, our beloved, you descend is really how the incarnation works. Because if there's no one to receive it, there's no point in the Master coming. He can't work abstractly. He can't make the material atoms be more spiritually aware. It's in direct relationship to the jiva, which is why I was talking about Gyanamata saying to Master, I know you have a world-changing mission, but I like to think you came for me, because he did. When we need you, Lord, and then we have that phrase, our beloved. And the beloved is one of the classical bhavs, one of the classical spiritual moods. You know, and the beloved is this extremely intimate personal relationship. When we need you, Lord, our beloved, it's not my great king, my almighty force. We're making it as personal as we can possibly make it, speaking directly. You came, you're knocking on my door. You came for me. And then is this line, one of the most poignant, I think, in the festival. Our human griefs, your love alone can mend. And this is an aspect of spiritual realization, and I'll speak for myself at least, that dawned on me very slowly. I was born with this tremendous desire to understand the secrets and the keys to happiness. And it was just the major thrust of my life, that I wanted to be happy. I spent 1 year in college. I lived in a college dorm. I dropped out of school after 1 year. It was just meaningless to me. People were intelligent, but they weren't wise. I was not looking for intelligence, I was looking for wisdom. And when I met Swami Kriyananda, I was looking at wisdom, and that's what I really wanted. He also had intelligence, which was very nice, but intelligence alone is not wisdom. I had no ambitions. I wasn't trying to be a lawyer or a doctor or a research scientist, so I had no need for all that knowledge. I just wanted the core of wisdom. But during that year, living in the dorm with all these other 18-year-old women, I decided that 18-year-old women were among the most unhappy people that I knew. In fact, my whole attitude about college itself was that there was just something fundamentally wrong with it, because we were on the verge. I felt that we had already entered adulthood. Looking back, I recognize, of course, what I didn't know. I was what Swami called doubly ignorant, ignorant of my ignorance, but nonetheless, that we were ready to have a meaningful experience of life, and instead we were cocooned, and most of our experience was vicarious through books and through intellectual study, and it just, the desire to actually live was profound, and the realization that it was through actual experience that knowledge, that understanding would come to us. But college just simply wasn't designed for that to happen. We were just in another holding pattern. I was at an expensive private college, so it was a particularly filtered group. It was way outside my social circle, in fact. I remember one of the first dinners I was there, and I was the last, I believe I was the last freshman class to live in a very formal, gender-separated way. It all began to break down. That would have been 1965. But we were at dinner, and we had these formal dinners, and we had people served our dinner, and we were just getting acquainted. And this one woman at the table said, we were talking about the Depression, don't ask me why, the 1930s, I mean. And this woman said, my mother said the Depression was just really difficult. She said, even when you had the money, like you couldn't get the china patterns you wanted, you couldn't get the silver pattern you wanted. I was, first of all, in my own home, there was no china pattern and there was no silver pattern. But just, I was, even now, I'm just speechless. I absolutely, it takes a lot to make me speechless. I just, I just didn't know what to say. However, going on to what I was saying, in that dormitory, and because I'm a counselor in my DNA, and so I ended up, trying to help some of these women. They wanted to be happy, but they didn't want to change. They wanted to be happy by making the world bring to them what they thought would make them happy. And if the world didn't bring it to them, they were simply unhappy and seemingly helplessly unhappy. At least that was the experience that I had of most of them. And of course, I only met a handful. But it was exceedingly disheartening to me. And it was very good for Vairagya, because it told me even more that this is not my world, and I really didn't know what to do. So I left that world. However, I myself was not unhappy. I have a relatively light center of gravity, and I was pretty cheerful. When I look back on my life, even though there was this driving need for truth before I met Swamiji and found self-realization, which was when I was 19. But I was never particularly unhappy. I had a lovely upbringing and lots of privilege and comfort and fine people to take care of me and, friends and activities, etc., good health. So I remember saying to Swamiji, I said, this has always been a little confusing to me, that I have this intense desire for happiness, but I've never really been unhappy, which was the truth at that point. And he said to me the obvious. He said, past life experience, obviously. Oh, yes, of course. But nonetheless, I still played out this fantasy, which it took me many years before I realized that it was a fantasy, that I could both have everything I wanted and never have to face real obstacles or tragedy, and choose God alone. And I didn't realize I was running that double, because I mentioned yesterday I had my expectation of ending my life in a concentration camp, so that was a little contradictory. But nonetheless, that was just a back drama. I was still happy. And so it was hard for me to understand human grief. I just really didn't understand it. Later, I came to realize that I was suppressing a lot. And I didn't know that. I was holding a lot at bay at all times. And that created a tension in my personality that I was doubly ignorant of. I just didn't know it was there. So this line of Swamiji's has always been particularly poignant, because the realization of it has been hard won. The realization of how courageous we have to be in really facing into the simple fact that this world will never satisfy us on the level that the heart longs for. And this is partly an answer to what I was talking about yesterday. I choose thy love, I choose thee alone. Well, we come to do that because we realize that everything else will disappoint us in the end. Now, it's very hard to hear that without that sounding cynical. And it's a very fine line that we walk, because it's not cynical. It's just a fact. It's raining this morning where I live, and we've had a long drought, and we've been having a drought, and now it's raining. I mean, a person can have all the opinions they want about whether these are good or bad things. A few days ago, I was talking about the world conflict, that we're sort of sitting on the edge of the possibility of that conflict and what that means for the world. We can like it or dislike it or be afraid of it or accept it or not accept it, but it simply is. And so all of the divine scriptures explain to us that what the heart is really longing for, and it's the way we're made, will only ever be satisfied in God realization. And that doesn't mean that there isn't great beauty, even joy, in many, many other aspects of life. But the power of that, even those natural and human phenomena to fulfill us, is always the extent to which we are able to experience through them the divine power. Our human griefs, your love alone can mend. That's what Swami's saying here. Everything that we suffer will only finally and ever be resolved when we understand and experience what God really wants from us. And we know that. We know that on some deep level. I think it was St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in thee. And that is also a beautiful phrase to contemplate. We will always be a little restless. Now here's the last part of this, which is a very important point. Swamiji has commented that we learn a certain amount from having our desires frustrated, but we learn more from having our desires fulfilled. And that seems a little contradictory somehow to the tough it out, life is hard, sort of attitude that you could hear in some of the things I've said. But if we desire something because we believe it will make us happy, and we don't attain it, we keep believing that if I only had that, then I would be fulfilled. And that's why we keep incarnating. And as Master put it, he said Satan is very clever because our lives almost work. Sometimes a life is really tragic, but most of the time it almost works. And we just want to make a small adjustment, and then it's going to be okay. But so if we're constantly frustrated, we're always thinking, if I could just have that. And so we stay on the wheel of samsara, so to speak. We keep coming back time and time again. But if our desire is fulfilled, if we have a true and lasting love affair and someone really understands us and we have a long and happy life together, we have beautiful children, we get to live in a lovely home, we fulfill our artistic ambitions, we become very wealthy and have all the money that we want, whatever it might be, you get to drink that cup to the very bottom. You get to have everything that you think is going to make you happy. And then you discover, as St. Augustine did, that my heart is restless until it finds its rest in thee. And that's where our freedom comes from the experience of knowing just how much this world can give us, and then finding that there's still a gap. Our human griefs, and it doesn't mean our terrible suffering, but just the grief that 60 years of wonderful marriage and then it's over. I used to be young and beautiful and now I'm not. I used to be physically strong and now I'm not. My beautiful child got a terrible disease and died. Whatever it might be, our human griefs, your love alone can mend. And that's the big shift. God alone. I choose thy love. I choose only thee. God bless you.